Right. Okay, comrades, I want to welcome you all to a very special meeting of the Workers' International Network. We're remembering a comrade who did absolutely incalculable, huge amount of input and contribution and work in building WIN and in making contacts with us everywhere. I don't want to speak for long. I just want to say just very quickly at this stage, just that I first got to know David in the mid 1970s, mid and late 1970s, when he came to Britain and was part of the international of the CWI's work, the Marxist Workers' Tendency in the African National Congress, uh, which was um, which was an absolutely exemplary piece of work of Marxists in a national liberation struggle, and they achieved miracles in the most horrifically difficult circumstances of exile, of the brutality of the apartheid regime, and of the bureaucratic suppression by the tireless leadership of the ANC. And in those conditions, David, along with comrades like Rob Peterson, Paula Ensor, Martin Legassick, and other comrades based initially in London. They did miraculous work, including the publication of the theoretical supplement of the journal with its theoretical supplement, Inqaba Basabenzi. Um, I'm not going to go into the history, but we lost contact for a long period after that. Of course, David returned to first to Zimbabwe and then to South Africa. He then emigrated to the USA, and we kind of lost contact. And of course, we also um, uh, we severed our connections, so to speak, with the work with the Committee for Workers International, of which I had actually initially been the founder, and we created the Workers International Network. And it was not until 2015, exactly 10 years ago, that our contact with David resumed. Um, we we um, we resumed contact on the internet, and it was a huge step forward for Win when David actually made a visit to Britain, actually explicitly and specifically in order to continue discussions with us. And he became an absolutely passionate and fervent supporter of the Workers' International Network. He came to conferences of ours. He almost commuted many times. He came to Britain back from his new residence in the USA. He was in almost daily communication. He brought us an absolute wealth of new contacts. Any struggle anywhere in the world, he immediately latched onto it and achieved miracles in making contact and in putting them in touch with the rest of us in the Workers' International Network. I'm talking about when the Black Lives Matter protests began in the USA, when there was a virtual uprising in Louisville, Kentucky. Then the leader of that, Tia, became a regular subscriber and a regular attender at our conferences. There was the work he did in support of the Clover strike in South Africa, which was linked in with the struggle against the Zionist regime in Israel. There was the absolutely stupendous work that was done with the when the uprising began in Belarus a few years back, when he put us in contact with the leaders of the most left and radical and militant trade unions, and they maintain contact with us to the present day, in fact. Comrades who made incredible sacrifices, who spent years in jail, languishing in jail. And David, as part of the work alongside other comrades here in the trade union movement in order to release Gennady and other comrades from their incarceration in the dungeons of the Lukashenko regime in Belarus. He established contact with Rohingya refugees from Myanmar who were based in Bangladesh. He maintains his contacts that he made from the earlier years in Zimbabwe. He helped to organise solidarity work with Comrade Marcia, who's here now, in Namibia. And there's probably many other examples that I've forgotten to mention. But it gives an idea. He was almost a kind of a living international in and of himself. And his work with WIN, he was completely dedicated to WIN in the last decade of his life. And it was a huge honour for us and a huge benefit to us that he worked. He many times stayed with me in London. He attended conferences of WIN in Yorkshire, in Lee Valley, and online. And in other words, his contribution is just incalculable. Now there are many comrades here. We're very welcoming and very happy to see comrades who played a big part in his life. Comrade Jabu, for one. I think at least two brothers of Comrade David, and you're very welcome, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you and other comrades too. I also have some written tributes which I promised to read out. But before we do anything else, I think it would be best if we allow David to have the first word.
Okay, thank you everyone. My name is Jabu Nalahatli. David is not only my comrade, but he was my mother's comrade before me. So I'm going to read a brief tribute that I've written to David Hemson, where I've said, friends and comrades, today we honor the life of David Hemson, a giant of the South African trade union movement. David's courage and resilience helped shape the strikes of the 1970s, confront unsafe working conditions, and challenge the machinery of apartheid. He stood shoulder to shoulder with workers across racial divides, providing that solidarity could overcome oppression. David was not only a leader, but a comrade whose spirit inspired all who knew him. His energy was tireless, his conviction was unshakable, and his humanity ever present. He reminded us that struggle is both a duty and privilege. Though we grieve his passing, we celebrate his example. His spirit lives on in every worker who refuses injustice and in every act of courage that keeps the struggle alive. David was my mother's comrade in the early South African trade union movement. Later, through my mother, June Rose Nala, and her friend Togozo Mpele, both unwavering trade unionists of the 1970s and 1980s, David adopted me into that circle of solidarity. Their comradeship was forged in the fires of the struggle, the strikes of the 1970s, the shaping of the legislation to protect workers, the battles against unsafe factory conditions, and the confrontation with the bosses shielded by apartheid's legal machinery. They were prepared for imprisonment, even death, to see workers liberated from oppression. In those years, white students stood alongside black workers defying segregation to form one hell of a movement. The apartheid system tried to bury the black voice through detentions and injustice, but David and his comrade led strikes so powerful that they brought the economic machine to a standstill. Out of the struggle emerged a revolutionary guard of workers forged beyond racial divides. Their comradeship would last throughout the ages. These legends brought the exploitative cheap labor system to its knees. David was not only a trade union giant in name, he was a giant in spirit. His resilience was unmatched, his energy immeasurable. It was his oxygen, his life. I remember watching him in meetings, his eyes alive with conviction, his voice carrying the weight of workers who had no voice of their own. He had what some might call an uncrushable spirit, and you could feel it in the room. It's no wonder he rubbed shoulders with Steve Bantubigo, Rick Tanner, Helen Bolton, June Rose Nala, BK Dladla, David Davy, Halton Shadow, women like Bella, Mambisi, Sibongile, and men like Mkultizi, Obed Zuma, Alpheus Mtetwa, Omar Bashir, and many more giants of the early trade union movement. They struggled, those who were prepared to die for workers' dignity. David belonged among them. He carried himself with fearless determination, but also with a warmth that reminded us that this was not just politics, it was humanity. What stays with me most, he knew he never seemed to tire. Even when the odds were stacked against us, even when others faltered, David's energy never dimmed. He had a way of making you believe that the fight was not only possible, but necessary. He reminded us that the struggle is not a burden, it is a duty and it is a privilege. I will never forget the day he stood in a meeting and declared himself a Zulu warrior. The room fell silent. The English, the Irish, the Scottish, the Welsh, the Americans all looked puzzled, but I understood. He was reaching back to his childhood, to the valley of 1,000 hills, to the warriors who shaped his spirit in that moment. He reminds us that the struggle is not only political, it is cultural, personal, it is lived. That was David, fearless, rooted and unafraid to claim his identity in the fight for workers everywhere. David was a true internationalist. His revolutionary global consciousness connected workers across continents. He brought a sense of comradeship that had no bounds, and his dedication to liberation was unwavering. His pride and joy was the 50-year celebration of the 1973 strikes, a reminder of the victories that shaped our history. Today we grieve for the man, the comrade, the friend, but we must also carry his example with us. David Hemson showed us what it meant to live for something bigger than ourselves. And though he is gone, his spirit is not. It lives in every worker who refuses to bend, in every voice that rises against injustice, in every act of courage that keeps the struggle alive. I like everyone to unmute their mics so that I can just pay my respect to this warrior. When I say long live the defiant spirit of David Hemson, I want people to respond long live. Can we unmute our mics, please?
Can everybody on mute?
Can you unmute, please?
Just for a moment, please.
Ready?
Yes, some of us,
Okay.
most of us, I think, are muted now.
Okay. When I say long live the defiant spirit of David Hemson, I want you to respond long live. Long live the defiant
Long
spirit
live!
of
Long
David
live!
Hemson. Long live. Long live
Long
the
live!
defiant spirit of David Hemson. Long live.
Long
The
live!
spirit of David Hemson. Long
Amandla awethu.
Amandla!
Amandla
live!
awethu.
Amanda!
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamu. Wonderful opening. Crispin, would you like to speak now?
Well, I think I may be able to play the clip. Shall I try that first?
Ah, yes, of course, sure.
Let's see if it works.
I will ask David Hemson to get us started off as one of the veterans of the anti-apartheid trade union movements. Thank you, David. Would you like to come in? Amandla!
Apparently, my Amandla was muted. Amandla!
Away too.
Okay. Thank you, comrades. Thank you, Jabu, for that warm greeting. Comrades, let's pass our mind back before we look forward again. In the 1970s and 80s, we had one of the most formidable movements the world has ever seen, compared in a sense only as strong or even greater than the anti-slavery movement, with much of the same theme: to be able to end the oppression of Black people in South Africa through united action across the world based on the labor movement and through solidarity actions which have taken place quite spectacularly by Liverpool dockers, by workers in the Midlands and the motor industry, by workers in different ports around the world, and most notably by the ILW in 1984, when those comrades took action and refused to unload a cargo of South African cargo from a ship. And despite the law, despite the police, despite every action that was taken against them, stood fast for 11 days. And really, that was the launch of the mass anti-apartheid movement in the United States, something which we honor them to this very day. Comrades from South Africa, it's not been a one-sided solidarity. The comrades in Durban and the docks in 2008 took action to stop the unloading of arms for the Mugabe regime at the time when the trade union movement was being bitterly oppressed in that country. Comrades, we are wanting to build in the same way as before, to be able to build as mighty or a bigger movement than we had in the anti-apartheid movement, picking up the line of action which then took place, taking forward, and you'll hear the testimonies of comrades about how that was done, using every possible action to stop this war machine, which is in front of our eyes, destroying whole peoples, and to be able to bring that to a halt and to be able to offer the Palestinian oppressed people an alternative view around the world, that they do not stand alone, that there are friends, there are activists, there's solidarity out there. We will know, they will know, that as the action has been taken and the international course of justice and the like, that the labor movement is alive, well, and prepared to take action. Out of this movement, we hope to see the rise of action groups and activities to be able to consolidate the call which is now being made to develop international trade union solidarity with the exploited and the oppressed, to be able to remember occasions like, for instance, Clover Dairies, one of the most noted dairies in South Africa, has been bought out by a Zionist company. Immediately, the workers there were retrenched. We are resisting in South Africa, elsewhere in the world, through our trade union action and in every possible means to bring this war to an end and to be able to let the Palestinian people live in peace and development. Thanks so much. Amandla.
Away. Thank you, David, for that setting us off comprehensive talk about how collective action was instrumental in ending apartheid in terms of the solidarity that was shown across the world.
Oh, thank you, Crispin, for showing us that. I think that really encapsulates what David stood for. Crispin, would you like to speak now?
Yes, certainly. That's fine. I think I'm going to focus something on the earlier history, simply because so much of what is later, his work with workers in the last few years, you would probably know much better than I do. I just wanted to contextualize a bit something about David's history. I was pointing out at his memorial that the Hemson family, on both sides of our ancestors, come from a long line of agricultural workers, domestic workers, fishing people, people who had no pretensions to any kind of nobility and so on. Yet it differs so much from so many of the sort of English-speaking white people of this province, who often tend to go back to say, well, we come from such good families in the UK. Well, our families were very good families, but they were not moneyed. Without going into too much detail, it's really interesting to me when I look back, and it's something it struck me clearly only recently. My mother's family were Welsh, and her father went into the Navy and actually did quite well to become a naval officer. And as a result, the family moved to the naval port of Plymouth. And so from the outset of that time, there was a strong connection with the docks in Plymouth. And then in the Second World War, my father was posted to work in the docks on the construction side. So there was a strong connection with the docks from that era in the Second World War. My mother was somebody with great passion and determination. But she was also very traumatized by the war, and their home and our grandparents' home in Plymouth were destroyed in one bomb blast. The houses were close to each other. My father was then sent to work on the docks in South Africa, first in Simonstown and then in Durban, as part of the war effort against Nazi Germany. And we were brought up on this idea of us against the Nazis. And I think that spirit of sort of resistance and feeling we are in opposition, we are prepared to take on the fight, that came so strongly, in particular from our mother, influenced David very greatly. I must say that in many ways, our background was very conventionally white South African. I can show you a couple of photos which make it clear, and some sense of irony at how we grew up. Let me give you this. Well, I'm not sure if you're seeing that now, but yeah, there is our nanny with David when he was a couple of years old, and our older sister Jill. And this is not exactly the image that you would, I think, conventionally associate with David. The family very well, the stalwarts of the Kloof Methodist Church. Very nice church. And of course, at that time, really entirely white. But you'll see David here in the left, standing next to our father. My mother was playing the organ, so we were very well represented there. What happened and here's another image from 1964 of the family, very conventional white English-speaking family with no great radicalism apparent. But from the outset, I think David was actually David was somebody with an innate sense of justice. And my mother told the story of, as a 2 or 3 year old, finding him with the child of the domestic worker, and they had one sweet, and they were sharing the sweet. It was passing from the mouth of one to the mouth of the other and back again in the most egalitarian way. And my mother said, well, there we are. That was where David got his sense of equity and justice from. His time we went to a really, posh private school. My father somehow managed to pay the costs involved. I don't know how he managed to do it. But at that time, David was just an ordinary student. He was very friendly with the son of our maths teacher. And it's really ironic that Humphrey's grandfather was J.S. Marwick. This is a person who was instrumental in establishing some of the labor controls in Durban. Years later, at the opening of a museum, local history museum called KwaMuhle in Durban, David gave the inaugural lecture, and he explained how his best friend's grandfather had actually set up the system of labor control in Durban that became the blueprint for the entire apartheid regime labor system. This is one of the great ironies. And apart from his best friend, his best friend's parents were also close friends with my parents. So we were actually at the heart of the apartheid system, even though it took a long time until we realized just how close we were to those dynamics. David actually went into the army, and I have a remarkable, he was conscripted into the army, and I have somewhere an image of him in the army with a bayonet. This actually, he spent 9 months in the South African Defence Force as a conscript. And actually this strengthened his sense of the injustice of the apartheid system, the racism, the arrogance, the brutality, which is not he comes across at least as militant, but perhaps militant apparently on the wrong side, but that was not actually where his heart was at all. So David went to the United States, to a rural town in Minnesota, that center of revolutionary ferment. And he had a social studies teacher who introduced him to literature. And this person must have been a confirmed socialist, because David came back from Minnesota a convinced and remarkably well-read Marxist at a very young age. He would have been about 19 or 20 at the time. I remember the conversation in the car when we were driving back from the airport, and he was denouncing Anglo-American and had been highly politicized in this very conservative part of the United States, which is like really interesting. He brought that radicalism to student politics at the University of Natal, as it was then. And it was on the Student Representative Council. He became a vice president of the National Union of South African Students, NUSAS, at a time when there was only the one anti-apartheid student organization. At that time, there were overwhelmingly university students were white, and gradually the numbers of black students were increasing. And we engaged at that time a lot with people like Steve Biko and other black students, because the University of Natal was the only university in South Africa which was a white, classified as a white university, but with a black medical school. And that's where Steve Biko was. And that was in Durban, close to the Howard College campus. So there was a lot of interaction between the students on the SRC and in student politics and the students from the medical school and a few students who had registered at the university before the segregation had taken place. It was while in pursuing a radical course within student politics and the ferment of 1968 and so on, David became involved in setting up the Wages Commission, which had the initial focus of drawing students into researching and exposing the wages paid to African workers in the province of Natal, as it was then, by British companies, and using the publicity in the UK to force change within to these starvation wages that were being paid. That then developed into a focus with other activists such as Halton Cheadle, Fazia Fisher, Rick Turner, the lecturer at Howard College campus, and the development of the General Workers Benefit Fund, a newspaper for workers called Basabenzi, and then David became directly involved with these comrades of his in founding unions for black workers. Now, this was actually completely against the decisions of the ANC. Halton Cheadle the other day made a point that, fortunately for us, the ANC and the South African Communist Party were just not very active in the Durban area in the late 60s and early 70s. And so there was a real awakening of consciousness which was not under anyone's control. Steve Biko was able to articulate and drive this movement of black consciousness. Those involved in union activity did so in defiance of the line that came from the ANC, that it was hopeless to organize black workers because it was a fascist state, and therefore you would never get anywhere with trying to organize black workers during the apartheid system. There was people like Halton and David and Fazia and so on refused to fit in with this kind of very Stalinist view and just went ahead and signed up workers. Here's an image that I can show you of David signing up workers outside a factory. This is probably in 1973. The vehicle was owned by a trade unionist, Harriet Bolton. Harriet Bolton was the secretary of a entirely Indian union, the Garment Workers Union, of workers of Indian background. But she gave wholehearted support at immense personal cost. I mean, this was her car, for example, that David was able to use and he was going to the factory gates to sign up workers. Huge numbers of workers joined. And this action led then to mass meetings. Here is one in 1973 at the time of the mass strikes that took place in the Durban area. There in the center is Harriet Bolton. And on your left, you can see David. So there was an incredible awakening of activity at that time. Of course, the apartheid regime felt very threatened by it. And indeed, this was a genuine threat of really major significance, that Black workers were prepared to take such risks in challenging the state and capital at the same time. So early in 1974, those involved in the labor movement were put under house arrest. David was put under house arrest. He was actually staying with the Boltons, and so he was under house arrest there. And so were people like Halton Cheadle. And after that, David actually was able to move to my parents' home. The conditions of the house arrest were very onerous. You could be out from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. You were not allowed to attend any meeting. You're not allowed to go into any educational institution, any factory, and so on. It was very, very restrictive. So in 1975, David actually then went into exile. I'm not an expert on his time in exile. I think people would know that he was in Zimbabwe for a time, and in his work to establish unions there, he fell foul of the Mugabe regime, which wanted total control, and he and comrades were put into the maximum security prison. And finally, as a result of pressure from groups like Amnesty in the UK in particular, eventually the Mugabe regime deported David and his family and other people detained like Darcy Detroit. So while he was in exile, he also taught for a time at the University of Dar es Salaam. He completed his doctoral work at the University of Warwick, and his doctorate focused on the organization of the docks, and it became a very influential work in reshaping the way that people analyzed worker organization, labor control in South Africa, and the nature of the apartheid state. I'm going to jump really ahead, partly because of time, but partly also because David's coming back to South Africa in 1990 as soon as he possibly could was very difficult personally and for his family. He ran into a very unpleasant opposition from people in the ANC who attempted to deny him work opportunities. They would intervene to prevent him getting a job. For example, he could have got a job at the University of Natal as it was then, but that he was allowed only a contract work, and then he had to try again. He succeeded finally in getting a job at the University of Durban, Westville. Ironically, the University of Durban, Westville had started life on buildings in the Durban harbour that David and our father had been instrumental in building. It started life as the University College for Indians, and then became the University of Durban, Westville. So, as I think people know, David divorced from his wife Trish, though he remained very close to his sons. And then eventually he married Suzanne Leclerc McClellan, and in 2000, we'll forget the date exactly, about 2014, they moved to the United States. 18 months ago, he fell really ill. I phoned him to find out that he had been admitted into a psychiatric ward of a really unpleasant American hospital. He was then, the family decided in the end to bring him to live with us. And we had a challenging time looking after him. There were innumerable physical problems, but he could still remember people, and he had moments of quite great lucidity. It was as if although we were told he had dementia, at times he was completely, we could communicate with him, and he never forgot people, which is really remarkable. He never thought I was anybody else. He would recognize that I was different from my twin brother and so on. He maintained links with people like Eric Nkosi, who spoke really very, very movingly at his memorial event last Saturday. So his death came in a way as peaceful as it could be after so many months of terrible pain and suffering. He died with his wife Suzanne, her daughter Soroya, my brother Jonathan, and I with him. So it was very sad, but it was the memorial really demonstrated how many lives he touched and the extent of his commitment and sacrifice over so many years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crispin. That's really enlightening. And it told me, for one, aspects of David's life that I had not been aware of. There are many comrades here who I know have contributions to make. I also have one or two that have been sent to me that I will be reading out. Is there anybody who wants to come in now? Otherwise, maybe I could read quite an important comrade of his over many decades was Paula Ensor. If I could read what she wrote. And then please put your hands up if you want to speak after that. Right, this is from Paula. I apologise that I'm not able to be present at this meeting to speak to you myself, but Roger has very kindly agreed to read this message on my behalf. As a friend and comrade of David's and a fellow expellee from the ANC in 1985, I want to add my voice to those honouring David today. I first met David in 1969. I was then a naive 18-year-old first-year student at the University of Natal in Durban, trying to find my way politically and socially in a completely new environment. David had already established himself as a radical student leader on the campus. The many obituaries that have been published in the recent past to honour David's legacy have pointed to his energy, commitment and organisational flair in initiating the wages commissions on university campuses, in the formation of the General Workers' Benefit Fund, and subsequently in laying the ground for the emergence of independent unions in South Africa in the 1970s. I personally learned a great deal from David in this regard, was able to draw on this experience in the work I was engaged in subsequently in promoting wages commissions on other university campuses and helping to set up the Western Province Workers' Advice Bureau. David was banned and house arrested in January 1973 in Durban, and a year or so later left for exile in Britain. I left South Africa with Rob Peterson the following May 1976. David and I connected up again in London, working with SAT2 in the production of Workers' Unity, which was edited by Rob Peterson. Peterson and I had by that stage connected up with the militant tendency in the UK. David and Martin Legassick joined us a while later. All four of us were suspended from the ANC in 1979 and finally expelled in 1985. If I recall correctly, the Marxist Workers' Tendency was formally constituted in 1980 with the first issue of the MWT journal, Inqaba, Basabenzi, published in January 1981, and the document, South Africa's Impending Socialist Revolution, Perspectives of the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the African National Congress, published in March 1982. David was a key contributor to all of these initiatives. David moved to Harare in Zimbabwe in 1982, where he married Trish Struthers, and their first child, Jesse, was born. In no time at all, he began organising workers and youth in Harare. I visited him a number of times in Zimbabwe from Botswana and was deeply impressed by how quickly he built an organisation of workers and young people committed to socialist ideas. He took me along on one occasion to address workers in an engineering factory during their lunch hour, and I experienced firsthand how enthusiastic they were about the ideas David put forward. I was also able to attend a conference he organised in mid-1984 of the Zimbabwe section of the CWI, attended by around 60 workers and young people at a school in Mbare. David and fellow MWT members Darcy Lutoit and Annika Popper inevitably incurred the wrath of the union leadership, and the Zimbabwean secret police eventually arrested and expelled them from the country in 1985. David returned to South Africa in 1990, and we lost touch for a time. We connected up again in 2018 when he contacted me to get a copy of the 1982 MWT Perspectives document I mentioned previously. He was visiting Zimbabwe at the time and had met up with a worker comrade who wanted a copy of the document. We remained in contact via WhatsApp and email thereafter until he fell ill. David was in the process of writing his autobiography, and much of our correspondence focused on sharing documents, interpreting past events, testing memories, and discussing current world events. He was a remarkable comrade, principled, modest, bold, energetic, affable, open-hearted, and deeply committed to the struggle for a socialist future. I stand with you all in spirit today in honouring his contribution. Right, now we have some comrades have their hands up. First, Patrick Bond. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much, dear comrades.
Right.
I will, if you're able to hear me and see me okay, I was just moving down to a place where there may be a bit more light as it's getting dark here in Johannesburg. Let's see if we can see. Two things that Rogers asked me to contribute include labor tributes, the South African Federation of Trade Unions. And in addition, some of you may remember the name Mzwaneli Mayakiso, and he's asked me to say one or two things. Frankly, actually, I'll just attach them. I think it's just fine because we don't want to be too repetitive with these tributes. But I mean, they both speak to both Zwelinzima Vavi, probably our best known African left trade unionist, and Mzwaneli, the brother of Moss Mayakiso, who was a well-known revolutionary trade unionist from the 80s, and changed perspective and all. But I think what Mzwaneli, the younger brother, has done is set out why interactions with David continued, even though this is sort of decades of spanning between Moss Mayakiso's revolutionary potential in the 80s and Mzwaneli thinking back on those days and how David was important. So I'll just attach those as tributes. Zwelinzima, I happen to see today, and I think as he learned more about what David was doing with the trade unions in 1973, but also with revolutionary theory. So let me make that as a second idea to just remind you of, which is also in a photograph you see in the chat box. 2022, David came, he did 3 visits to University of Johannesburg for our social theory class. And David's role was to remind that in the debates of the 1970s that were terribly important for keeping some Marxism building and growing, we could be very distracted. And the distractions came from a couple of schools of thought. They were basically from Communist Party dogma called the two-stage theory, the National Democratic Revolution, and the underlying approach called colonialism of a special type. And so I think what you'd see in the article that Legassick and Hemson published was a refutation of some of what the ANC had assumed. And the ANC had a very skilled analyst who David was on good terms with, named Harold Wolpe. And Wolpe had an idea called articulation of modes of production. I think what David and Martin Legassick were trying to do in the mid-70s with this concept, racial capitalism, now very popular. It's being used in different ways. Cedric Robinson popularized it in the US in the early 80s and mentioned, the origins are in South Africa. But they were really responding to the sense that the Communist Party was giving, and Wolpe was giving, of the logic of the two-stage theory that followed from looking at South Africa's colonialism of a special type. So racial capitalism was different, and a couple of the other colleagues at the time, Ben Magubani, later Wolpe himself, would revisit and actually say, the notion that you could have some race-class analysis that was durable and fixed was incorrect. And therefore that probably one of the reasons that not just Paula, as she was saying, but also David and Martin were kicked out, was they persisted in saying, no, we need to understand the way capitalism works, and especially multinational corporations, in a different way, as taking advantage of the deep racism of apartheid, but not necessarily building in this as a two-stage process where you simply can get rid of the racism and go about having a normal, ordinary capitalism. I'll let you all read that because I've attached that 1976 article that I think was very influential. But I do want to just remind you that David had that charm that could take him into a social theory master's class in the University of Johannesburg in recent years, and just absolutely thrilled people with the debates and the dynamism you can even just see in his face, his gestures, and the ability to keep, which I don't have the ability to do, keep the students really focused in on some of the great issues of our time. Hamba Kashli, David. We'll always remember David in those sorts of settings and making intellectual inputs, as well as being a salt of the earth organizer and a great human being. Long live the spirit of David Hemson. Long live Amandla. Away to.
Oh, thank you, Patrick, and very welcome to our meeting. Please come again. Marcia, we've got Comrade Marcia has been fighting a heroic and probably rather lonely struggle in Namibia, fighting against her victimization, and she's a regular attender at our meetings, and I'm very happy to welcome her. Marcia?
Good day, everyone.
Hi, Marcia.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Marcia. I'm from Namibia, Swakopmund. I've came to know Comrade Hemson in 2023 October, when they had a labor tribunal in Windhoek, Namibia, the capital city of Namibia. So after that, I was so much involved with him. I'd like to acknowledge the passing of our comrade, David Hemson. I had the honor of fighting alongside with them, even though we had there was distance, and his solidarity and dedication to our fight were truly inspiring. So his passing is a loss to a lot, especially those who, like me, who wanted to grow from his guidance. So I would just like to say, may his legacy live on through the continued struggle.
Well, we all salute your struggle, Marcia, and thank you for your contribution. We have no other hands up, but I know there are other comrades who had expressed an interest in speaking. So, who is next? Well, while we're waiting for comrades to speak, I have got one other short contribution to read out. But I would encourage other comrades, please, to be ready to come in as soon as that is finished. This is from Vivian Walsh, who was who is a comrade in Britain, who got to know David and the other South African comrades very well in the early period. She sent very brief memories that she's asked me to pass on. She recalled her first meeting with David when David visited Bradford to speak. This must have been in the early 1980s, to speak alongside the legendary militant Labour MP Pat Wall. Following which, she gave David a lift to Manchester, where he was booked to speak at another meeting. And David stayed with her. She put him up for the night on her sofa, and she got to know David better later in the 80s when Vivian had worked in the London headquarters of the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the ANC, and she worked closely with David and Trish and with Darcy and Annika, including on occasion babysitting their children. In particular, following the incarceration of David and Darcy in Zimbabwe, Vivian worked full-time contacting trade union officials in Britain and mobilizing solidarity support. And she especially recalled one occasion when one British trade union comrade, one British lady, wrote an outraged personal letter to Robert Mugabe, reproaching him with her reminder that during his own prison sentence under the racist Rhodesian Ian Smith regime, she had been busy organising jumble sales to raise money in aid of the campaign for his own release. So how could he dare to repay her by jailing these comrades? I thought that was an interesting note. And Vivian was very sorry that she was unable to participate today. She's celebrating her 80th birthday party today, and that's why she's not here. Right, I think Finn is the next comrade. Finn, who's president of the Dublin Council of Trade Unions.
Comrades, I want to begin by expressing the sympathy of the Irish comrades for David's family and friends. We have very fond memories of David here. He was always a big assistance to us in the work that we do here. He had great personal qualities and had a great manner and a great patience in explaining ideas and in supporting comrades in their various areas of struggle. I first met David in the 70s, the late 70s, during our time together in the Committee for Workers' International. But more recently, when we were trying to construct WIN, David played an enormous role in that, and I met him several times at many, many meetings, seminars, discussions, telephone discussions, online discussions, and he was always very, very insightful. He had a very deep understanding of Marxism and of world politics. He was also very broad in his interests. He was interested in science. He was particularly committed to the struggle for climate justice and issues of that nature. And each time we intervened, he showed, like I said, tremendous knowledge, understanding, and qualities of that nature. I know in my own case, I was some years ago, I was in hospital for a few weeks with an illness, nothing major, but David was very supportive at that time and very encouraging in helping me to kind of see the future in a bright way. It turned out fine. Um, his most recent intervention was probably a meeting around the Palestine issue, drawing comparisons between the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa and the struggle against the apartheid regime in Israel. So David hosted that meeting, and it was very interesting. We should maybe remember also that it was in Ireland where a group of workers took action in 1984 in a store, Dunn Stores, as it was called, a major shop in the centre of Dublin, where workers refused to handle South African goods and were sacked as a consequence. And then a strike was led by the union that they were involved with, which lasted some years. But the end of that strike was that the Irish government at the time decided to block trade with South Africa. In other words, to support the demand of the boycott. And as a consequence of international intervention, the South African regime fell. I know David was very involved with the trade union battles. We used to read the journal Inqaba, and that was a very interesting development with the struggle against the Stalinist regime in South Africa. So David was always very anxious, very happy to explain ideas, to spend time, and like I said, to be patient. He had great human qualities, which is often missing, or it's occasionally missing in political activists. In David's case, it was enhanced. His political interventions were enhanced by his interest in humanity and his support for comrades. So the Irish comrades, many of them will have developed close relationships, like me, with David. I'm very appreciative of the help that he gave to us, and I hope it's of some comfort to his family to know that he's very warmly regarded and held in very warm regard amongst the comrades here in Ireland. So once again, I want to express my deepest sympathy and all of our deepest sympathies to David's family and to his friends. And there's a saying in Irish which goes, Ní bheidh le héad an Arish, which translates as, we will never see his likes again.
Absolutely, comrade. No other hands up at the moment. Please, please don't feel shy to come in. I know there are other comrades who had expressed an interest in speaking. I don't want to put them on the spot, but please do don't hesitate. There are comrades from South Africa here, some who we're very glad to see again, some who we're meeting for the first time. You're very welcome to participate. Yes, Comrade Jimmy from Dublin.
Comrades, there's so much that can be said about David, the impression he made on people and people that he didn't know, and on issues that are lost because they were so small but so important to individuals. I met David at a conference somewhere in the late teens in Britain. And from the very beginning, David, he made overtures to talk to practically everybody in the room. And it wasn't just talk for the sake of talk. He was talking to get to know people. He was talking to let people know the ideas that he was interested in. And the vast majority of the people at the conference realized they had met somebody, or they were in the presence of somebody who had not just a history of activity, but a consciousness of the value of that history, and wished that it wouldn't be lost. But it wasn't a case of somebody saying, I'm a boy from the past, I did all these things. It was a guy who was looking at it saying, I have history, I have understandings, but it's the future that's more important. And it's the issues that face us now and the issues that face ahead. And not long after that, we were very, very fortunate, through David, to make contact with some trade union leaders in Belarus. These were people who were fighting against oppression on a personal and an organizational sense. And David organized a Zoom meeting, which went on to several pages of people attending, mainly from Belarus. And he spoke about the need for those organizations to try and keep themselves together, and made promises to them that we would help externally from the win supporters abroad. One of the things that was very important to the unions over there was the loss of material, where the state was going into union halls, wrecking them. And not mainly, exclusively, it was the independent trade unions that they wished to suppress, because there is a trade union in Belarus whose the guy who holds membership card number 1 of that union also happens to be the dictatorial president of Belarus, Lukashenko. But the thing about it was that David organized these meetings, and in Ireland we were very fortunate that there was a number of comrades held positions in trade unions. I was very fortunate to be in the electrical trade union and linked directly with Gennady, who was the leader of the electrical trade union in Belarus. We promised and we delivered on getting grants from the unions in cash and getting grants for material, which was sent over through the backstreet channels. So we had an experience that was very unusual, that trade unions in Ireland were now assisting in the underground with the unions who were being oppressed and suppressed in Belarus. David was the key to those connections. He was the key to the ideas. He was the key to linking up the people. And the greatest tribute that I reckon that can be paid to David in memory of that work that he did. A couple of weeks ago, Gennady Fedenich was released from prison and dumped on a crossroads on the border with Lithuania. A day or two later, I managed to make contact with him on phone, and I asked him if he would be interested in having a conversation with the WIN comrades and speaking at a meeting. And David's question, or Gennady's question, is the tribute that I refer to. Will David Hemson be there? David is so important. Now, here was a man who had spent a couple of years, most of them in solitary confinement, and David Hemson was the man he wanted to talk to. No greater tribute can anybody in the trade union movement pay than that. So I salute David. One other thing about the generosity of the personality of David. I took advantage of the COVID years of going back to school after a lifetime of not going to school. And I took on a degree project. At times I got into debt, I got into trouble because I didn't know. I had no references. I had nobody to consult with. And I mentioned it to David. And David was like the picture of generosity in the advice that he gave, but not just the advice, the availability that he offered. And many a time in the dark hours of America, he would get out of his bed and he would contact me and he would sort out some problem with a computer, whether it was a technical problem with a computer or with a layout. That work that I did is a tribute to David as well. So in every sense, in a trade union sense, in a political sense, in the personal sense, David Hemson contributed to my life, contributed to the interests of my life, and contributed to the world that I claimed to be interested in. He was just one hell of a human being, and I miss him.
That's a beautiful tribute, Comrade Jimmy. Thank you so much. I think we all endorse that. Pam, you're next.
Yeah, that's feel on contribution. I didn't meet David until WIN was being formed. So I I've obviously listened to all his life history and all the things he's done, which I didn't know before, which is, what a wonderful man. he was a stalwart to win. I'm just repeating what people have said already, really, but he was always a backbone, and he was always there. He was always there bringing contacts and bringing new material and so on. But just a couple of little anecdotes, more personal ones, following on from what Jimmy said, that we had a wing conference in the Lee Valley in 2023, and I'd somehow finished up with most of the responsibility for the practical organisation, but also for running the Zoom link. And I arrived at the Lee Valley with my computer, having very little idea what I was doing. And I was panicking away, and David walked in the room and he says, "Oh, you just do this, this, and that." And that was it. Calm descended. And I think he contributed quite a bit to the smoothly running of the Wing conference. My only other memory of him, I've actually met him twice. I think we had a previous conference, and I remember the way he was dressed. He had this sort of suit on, of like I think it was like orange and yellow squares or something, and a matching hands, if I remember properly. So he really stood out. So that sort of was a conversation starter, really. But he's a really nice man. I miss him terribly. I'm really sad about the way things turned out for him in the end. But I know he'll always be remembered, and his contribution will always be remembered.
Thanks, Pam. And we all heartily endorse that point. Right, last call, comrades. Do please take advantage of this opportunity to record your memories and the lessons of David's life. Rob, good to see you.
I think
Thank you.
Ed's waving his hand at you, Roger,
Thank
as well. Sorry,
I'm
Rob.
Sorry.
I'm
I
very
just
sorry
said I
for
think Ed was waving at you after Rob's finished. Sorry, Rob.
Ed, yes. Rob, and then Ed, yes. Both very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I just apologize for being late. I was at some kind of end of year function and I really didn't realize how late it was, but I'm glad I made it. Yeah, I've got a lot to thank Dave for. I did speak at the memorial here in Durban, and it was a speech on behalf of both my wife and myself. So it wasn't a very political speech because my wife Corky is by no means a political activist. She's got other wonderful qualities, but she isn't a politico. But during that speech, I mentioned that I first knew David when I was a young student, and I was inspired by the Wages Commission that he was involved in. I don't know if anyone has mentioned that, but it was a group of students, academics, activists who fundamentally laid the foundation for what is most of the modern South African trade union movement. And I met him a few times before he was banned. And then he left for the UK, where he continued his activism, and he and others, Martin Legassick, in particular, was a notable comrade. They became close to militant and started the Marxist Workers' Tendency. But since that talk, I also remember that I probably did meet him at my parents' house when I was a schoolboy. My mother was a traditional liberal, and this was a liberal in the most positive sense of the word. South African liberals, the real liberals, I think, were different from what most people regard as liberal. And she was involved in a magazine called Reality. And Dave was also on the editorial board of Reality, together with my mother and other Liberal Party and other Peter Maritzburg liberals. And so I think I met him briefly there. Then I met him in Zimbabwe again, and he came with Trish, and then also Darcy du Toit and Anneke Popper. They came, I think, a bit later. And Dave wrote me in to, I wouldn't say subversive politics, but I'm trying to think of the right word. You know, we obviously had to keep a very low profile, and we worked for a few years before the detentions, incarcerations, and then eventually the deportations. But I think that's when I really got interested in politics, in socialism, and in Marxism. So I thank David very much for that education. And then at Durban, when he came back to Durban, we had been there for a few months, and so we've been good friends ever since. We kind of met each other quite often. It was very sad when he left to join his wife Suzanne in the United States, but we still kept in touch. And it was a great shock when we heard how ill he had become, and we didn't visit him as often as we should have when he came back to Durban, but we did keep in touch. And it's with great sadness that we've really lost something in our lives. Both Corky, who was very friendly with David, he was, as I'm sure others have mentioned, he was such an outgoing person. And I think he and Corky also had a special relationship that Corky certainly values. So we're very sad that he's no longer with us, but his spirit will live on, and I'm sure he has given inspiration to very many people. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rob. It was good to see you again. Comrade Ed, I'd like to just tell comrades, Ed also was a founder member of WIN and has played a huge role. And you know, you're very welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing your contribution.
Oh, thank you, Roger. Well, what I can say is only very limited because, I mean, I agree with what every comrade has said about how we have so much to thank David for and to admire his work. I suffer from senile dementia, so I can't remember very much detail, but I do know that I've known David for a long time. I think I knew him when he was in London, and I was working in London then. And I met him subsequently at several meetings, and I just want it to go on record that I'm supportive of everything that's been said about the great contribution that he made to our movement. That's it.
Well, thank you very much, Ed, and we all wish you all the very best, and we're really happy to see you at our meetings. Is there any other comrades who would like to speak?
Roger, if there's no one, I'd like to read something from Dogo Zombele, who is stuck between, her flight was delayed. She wanted to be in this meeting. She's coming from Botswana, and she said she'll try and get to the car. So I don't know if she'll get there on time. I was introduced to David by her, and I think it's really important to say something because I spoke to her early during the week and she really wanted to be here.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, let me just get something from what she wrote on the Friends. She says, okay, sorry. I just have to go back to this. There it is. Sorry. Okay, I'll just go back and read it straight from this. Okay, she said, she wrote about him as both a dear friend and a wonderful uncle to her son. And she says she'd like to share a memory of how David, fresh from exile, worked with her in organizing the dock workers in Durban. He stood by me as we represented international seafarers who docked in South African waters. With his voluntary mentorship and support, I was able to negotiate and sign the first international agreement, a milestone that reflected our shared commitment to workers' rights. Our immediate mandate was on securing core bargaining rights for grain road shipping line employees, especially the recognition of shop stewards. I vividly remember one particular meeting with the now retired Judge Raymond Zondo, who at that time was a partner at Mate Zondo and Company, 320 West Street. The firm represented the TGW. We had to instruct Ray to have a ship arrested for violating maritime laws. During that discussion, we realized that there were no lawyers of color who were specializing in maritime law. True to David's character, he turned to Ray and said, "Don't you think you should do something about this?" That moment has stayed with me ever since. I think I should ask Ray whether he did, in fact, encourage young law students to pursue maritime law. I also remember the shock on Ray's face when he told him there is no way except to arrest the ship. Sorry, she was really emotional as she was writing this, but she basically says, "David, my mentor and friend, I shall miss you." Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's a very moving tribute. Comrades, if there is anybody else who wants to speak, this is your opportunity. If not, I would like to close the meeting with a few words, but I'm giving a last opportunity to anybody else who wants to speak. Okay, comrade, I think this has been a very moving meeting. And of course, we salute David's unique and absolutely inspiring dedication to the liberation of the working class. But I also want to say that I think we'll all agree obituaries are not enough. We've got an obligation to ensure that his contribution will endure and that his life has not ended in that sense, but that it's contributed to the movement, which is not by any means ebbing. And what I mean by that is to say we have had tragically we've had other big losses in the last few years. Apart from, in addition to David, there was the death of Comrade Martin Legassick, also from South Africa, of Birgitta from Denmark, and we're very glad to see her partner Rolf is with us regularly at our meetings. We had the loss of a comrade who joined us quite late, but made a huge contribution, of Tanvir Gondal from Pakistan. There was the loss of my brother Julian. All of these people made their contribution and they made their mark. And David, of course, is an outstanding example of that. But of course, it's a sign that many of us are getting quite advanced in years, and we have an obligation to make sure that what we have learned and the input that we have made does not die with us. Now, it's not that we're the fact that the age profile of Win is so high. That's not a mark of the fact that it's not a mark of obsolescence on our part. We're not obsolete. Our ideas are by no means obsolete. It's actually a living record of the history of the last few decades. That we're only now seeing a revival of the class traditions that were so abundant in at the time when we were young, and now at last a new generation is rising in the terrible crisis of capitalism that is developing. That we're only now seeing that the new generation is taking up the cudgel and is trying to learn the lessons of the past. And our best contribution is to link up with that movement and to try to draw them in to the work that we're doing. And the best tribute that we can make to David's work, and the real memorial, is to try to build the Workers' International Network and to continue the go further along the trail that we have launched. I want to say about that we need to keep the ideas alive in that way. We are in the last 3 months, I'd like to remind comrades of what we've been able to do. We've been holding over the last 6 years. We've been holding weekly meetings with comrades from every continent around the world. But in the last 3 months alone, we've had comrades speaking from Germany, Indonesia, Nepal, Israel, the Philippines, Palestine, Belarus, Ireland, South Africa, USA, India, from Britain, and the birth of a new much left party here, and of course this meeting now. And that shows the range and the scope. I don't think there's anywhere else that workers around the world will be able to keep their finger on the pulse and understand what is happening around the world. And that's something that we're proud of, even though we're a very small group, and we wish that we had many times more people coming to our meetings. But we have to keep that tradition and that mission alive. Now, during that time, we of course, it's awkward timing for our meetings and so on. We cover 16 time zones, from California in the west to the Philippines in the east. We cover 4 continents, and it's actually we're very grateful to the comrades who made the sacrifice of coming. And of course, we also have our Win YouTube channel, so comrades are able to keep up and to catch up with meetings that they missed. I'd ask all the comrades who are here, some of them for the first time, some of them that we don't see so often, please help us. Take that as part of your tribute to David's memory, to attend our meetings, to try to bring other comrades around to join us too. We have a conference taking place, which we've now decided is going to be, because of the expense of holding a physical conference, especially the travel fares as well as accommodation, we're now having an online conference. It'll be over the weekend of 7th and 8th of March. And we hope all comrades will participate in that. We'll join our meetings, we'll speak up at our meetings, we'll contribute their experiences and their ideas, and we have a free and democratic discussion of all the issues facing the working class. And we make no apology for asking comrades to make a financial contribution too. And that would be a kind of material tribute to the contribution that David made. We do need finance from the point of view of keeping up our subscriptions to Win and to YouTube and our websites. and also we to some travel and visits and participation in meetings and so on. And we would appeal to comrades to consider what they could contribute. Not huge amounts, but some. Especially if it could be regular contributions. But generally speaking, I think we can all feel very proud of the work that we've done in WIN, and we owe a huge debt and a tribute to Comrade David. And I'm happy that we were able to make to organise this meeting in his memory. So I thank all the comrades. We are not going to have any meetings for the next 3 or 4 weeks. We're going to take a rest for the holiday period. We'll be meeting again, I think, on the 11th of January, and we're looking forward to seeing all of you comrades and many more, I hope, then and at all our future weekly meetings. So, comrades, thank you again for your attendance and your participation in what's been a very moving and significant meeting. Thank you,
Thank
comrades.
you.
Bye-bye.